I come from a relatively poor family, and my dad had struggled to get us into the lower middle class. Noelle's family is also from a humble background. And so when we started living in Hong Kong as a couple, life was pretty difficult. We had no network to climb up. We had no resources to build anything with. We were workers, and I used to work in the shipyards. Noelle would often work with me and clean boats, and we'd do whatever we had to do to stay alive. That meant that we were face to face with the lower level triads, what they call the Madai, the soldiers. They're the people who do all the jobs, all the dirty work, and the bosses sort of rule the triad world. In those days, you certainly couldn't interact in Hong Kong or in the Far East without at some point rubbing the triads, and either the right way or the wrong way. If you were a customer of the triads, you were okay. So if you were buying something or visiting somewhere in their, one of their businesses, that would be okay. If you were, let's say, like I was trying to get some work in the shipyards, but all the shipyards were all triad related. And of course that came down on me the one day. So the first incident I recall was this fellow turned up at the boat. We knew who he was. And he said to Noelle in Cantonese, "If you stay here, if you continue like this, something's going to happen to you or the boat or your dog or perhaps all of you." When I got home, Noelle told me, and I went off like a rocket. Now, I'm a fairly quiet guy. I've always been a minority, so I know how to more or less keep my mouth shut and to do things. But don't ever threaten my family. I become a different person. So that story had a anticlimax ending. I went to the boss and we kind of sorted it out. It's another subject. The next incident was also to do with working on boats, where one of the fellows was quite a threat in the area. And one day, this fellow, the Chinese fellow, his name was Ah Hong. One day, Ah Hong was missing. And then we discovered that there had been a clash between two clans in the triad, and that Ah Hong had been chopped up, and that his body was then taken in pieces and spread to the four corners of the earth. And this is a very ancient practice, what can I say, punishment, but it's also a ritual statement to say, don't mess with us. And for the Chinese to have the body separated in pieces like that is very, very bad. And we know that it eventually ended up being Ah Hong because they found his head right up the mountainside. That was my first understanding that these things are real and they don't play around. We do see it on movies, but it's real. We'd heard hundreds of stories of kung fu clashes inside the triads. These involved broadswords and all sorts of things. Later on, they ended up being the Chinese chopper. So I was very interested to see, well, was the kung fu inside the triads different to the kung fu outside the triads? And that became a bit of a goal of mine. I'd just like to mention very quickly, there was another attack once on Noelle. We lived in a village out by the eastern side of Hong Kong on the water, and there was a very small village road going down to this place. At one point, Noelle coming down in her little car, and some fellow coming up. Turned out he was the boss of a rather nasty group, and he lost his cool. I won't get into all the gory details, but I had to run around the side of the car. I'd kicked my shoes off, so I came around the side of the car to protect Noelle, this bloke was about to start punching her through the window. And I prepared myself, and I saw his bodyguard, who was this thick-set, very strong Chinese man, look at me. He looked at my feet. He saw that I'd taken my shoes off. He looked at the way I was standing, and he immediately stepped forward to his boss and cautioned him. This is a very important thing to say, but also something worth understanding is that people don't get into very violent confrontations unless it's absolutely necessary. It's very much along the lines of which nature operates in the wild. There will be confrontations, but they tend to be just surface, and then people disappear. When they become big, like the story of Ah Hong losing his head and ultimately his limbs and everything else, that's when it's gone to a very serious level. Up until that point, there will always be great caution, because you don't know what someone else knows. And that bodyguard looked at me, and he must have seen the shoes off and seen everything, and the position of my hands and so on, and he just went, let's stop this. Anyway, it turns out the bodyguard was the person of reason in the whole thing. I eventually found my way into the triads on a better standing, not as a clash. And that's a story that's probably worth getting into, but not at this point. What I want to mainly emphasize is that you have Kung Fu that you see in the street, which is the usual, mostly forms and whatnot, but occasionally you see some guy with a spear or whatever. And then you get the Kung Fu that's been operating in a parallel society, and that's been going on for more than 3,000 years. The parallel society, which is the Triads, has existed for a long period of time and has a very rich history. In fact, people don't even really know what the history is. And some of our later research showed that, and that will come out later. But you have these two things. You have recreational Kung Fu, and then you have the real Kung Fu. That has been something that has developed in the last 100 to 120 years. Chinese martial arts before that was much more serious. It was warfare. It was civil unrest, combat of all sorts. All of it ended up in killing. So on this side, you had military and civil unrest, assassins and all that lot. On this side, you had monks who were teaching the outside people. And that all evolved through the Qing dynasty to where we were in the 80s in Hong Kong and other parts of the Far East, where you had recreational Kung Fu and Triad Kung Fu. And Triad Kung Fu was still very much the civil unrest, almost warfare type stuff. I remember seeing one incident where there was two gangs rushing at each other, and one fellow stood out the front with double sickles, and as the one gang charged into the second gang, he just flicked the first sickle, hitting the fellow in the chest, and that was it. He folded up dead. So that type of combat is very serious, and I did experience that when I discussed and practiced and interacted with the triads, that the martial arts we spoke about were real. There was no such thing as, oh, you develop power from shaking your arms or anything else. It was only when you use this weapon and you put it there, that happens. If you cut here, he bleeds to death. If you cut here, you give him a warning. And so it was very practical. It was very, very straightforward. About a year before we left the Far East, there was a very strange incident. There was a drunk Western fellow who was visiting Hong Kong, who'd gone into a pub, and he had said something or other to the young lady behind the counter, and I don't know what it was, but there seems to have been a problem. She will have cautioned him. I know, because it was normal practice. There was a lot of Westerners that were drunk and disorderly, and the young ladies behind the bar were often very, very well controlled. And so whatever happened, it got out of control, but this young lady was the girlfriend of a triad member. Some minutes later, a van turns up, 5 guys jump out with medical masks on and Chinese choppers, and they start axing into this fellow with a specific striped rugby jersey on. His hand went up, it was severed there, I think it was in here, and there was all sorts of terrible damage done. The choppers had been smeared with excrement, and so just making everything much worse. But these are all tactics from ancient times, and as I said to you, these are triad operators. This is how they operate. So Kung Fu, if you're on the receiving end of that, your Kung Fu has to be good, it has to be real. And if 5 people come with Chinese choppers, then you have to deal with 5 people with Chinese choppers. If you've got a weapon, well, good luck to you. And if you haven't, you've got to find a way to survive, even if that means running away. And running away is a specific tactic used in Chinese martial arts. People seem to think it's for always just one-on-one, which we get from Bruce Lee movies. Not true. Anyway, to end that story, it turned out the poor fellow was the wrong guy. He just happened to be wearing the same shirt. There's the moral of the story. You need to know martial arts, and you need to know very, very good martial arts. They need to work. We were with members of a Kung Fu school from out of town. Singapore were visiting us in Hong Kong. And we were down the back streets in a well-known Triad red light district. We were busy filming. There was 4 girls, and there was about 4 of us blokes. At some point, some old scrungy Triad fellow gets up and he says to one of the girls, "Hey, Leng Loi, le jo mat ye?" "Hey, pretty girl, what are you doing?" And then he goes on to say, "You can't be here." And we very politely explain, or my wife explains, "We're not doing anything, we're just filming here and we'll be out of here in a minute." "No, you can't film here, this is our territory." We said, "There's no territory here, this is just public space and we're filming." Anyway, to my right appears some guy with a Chinese chopper. And I thought to myself, oh boy, here we go. To my left appears a guy with an umbrella, and I'm thinking, yeah, now we're in this. So I'm kind of visualizing, what am I going to do? And the third old man starts coming towards us. Now, Noelle's sister had been out front. She doesn't know anything about martial arts, but she was, Noelle sort of pulled her back and said, "Okay, stay out of this now." Noelle carried on talking. At some point, I just said to this old bloke, "Stay back." Old bloke, he's probably my age. I'm 62 now. I reckon he was about 62 then. This old bloke, I said to him, "Stay back." And I'm speaking Cantonese. He doesn't stay back. So I start swearing at him. And he doesn't stay back. And he keeps coming. And I'm thinking, oh no. Now he's got earphones in. And he's listening to the racing. So he's busy trying to hassle me while he's betting on the horses. Anyway, I stepped in. I just used a technique called Lo Hon Hoi Mun, which is a Shaolin movement. You step through, double strike to the top of the chest. And I tried to do more of a push than a strike, just so you don't do as much damage. Anyway, this fellow went up and backwards onto the nape of his neck. Then I turned, and the fellow with the chopper was actually a chef. And so he just zoomed off. And I turned to this side, and the fellow with the umbrella, well, he thought, no, I'm not doing this, and he ran off. Oh, thank goodness for that, because I thought I was in big trouble on that moment. Anyway, we grabbed our crew together and off we went before the big gang turned up. We got on the train, and Noelle and I were giggling, and Noelle's sister was sort of complaining a little bit. And the other guys from the Singapore Kung Fu school were absolutely dumbstruck. And that's the difference between learning real Kung Fu and baby Kung Fu.